Hi, Aparna. Can you hear us now?
Now I can hear you, yes.
It's just gone live. So it's my pleasure to discuss mental health, peace of mind with Aparna and Vandana. Can you all see Aparna? Yeah. And you can hear her too, right? Okay, thanks. So I think Aparna and Vandana have both been introduced. I just wanted to know, would you like to speak to our audience for a minute and introduce yourselves? Then we can start discussions on your two amazing books.
Sure, I can go.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me, and I'm really sorry I couldn't be here in person. It's just been a little bit unwell yesterday and couldn't travel, but really I'm glad that we could make it happen through this hybrid format. So just a little bit about me is that, you know, I've had a sort of, in a way, a normal life of having a family, having a career, but I've also lived with a serious mental health condition called bipolar disorder for the last 20 years. And that's what's led to the beginning, to this book, really, Chemical Khichdi. And I've been wanting to write it for a long time, and I'm very glad been able to find an audience for it. So I guess I just look forward to discussing that, and I'll leave it to Vandana to say a bit more.
Thanks, Bulbul. Hi, Aparna. I've been introduced. I like to write about the mind. My professional training is as a filmmaker. I went to film school in Pune. And I made a film on major depression, which was the first film on major depression, really, in 2002. And subsequently made a film on anger, which was an international documentary, which left me with so much material that I could write a column for about 6 years after that on the mind. And I want to say that aside from writing, I'm now an accidental entrepreneur, which is, you know, the other end of the spectrum of writing and music and filmmaking. And so it's quite a challenge. So everything that I've written in my book is being put to test.
Thank you. I think the pandemic has had a contribution. I know that the pandemic hasn't been quite fair to us, but it has had a contribution, and that is, it's sort of triggered bringing out mental health conversations out in the open. I think for a very long time, mental health remained in the clinic with the specialists who are mental illness specialists, more with the mental illness specialists than with the mental health specialists. So today we shall talk more about mental health based on the two amazing books written by Aparna, one by Vandana. Aparna's book is Chemical Khichdi, How I Hacked My Mental Health. So this is a very courageous account of a personal journey where Aparna recognized, embraced her mental health condition, which is bipolar disorder. And this is a book of hope for me. It's a book of how she coped with it and led a productive life towards self-actualization, growth, and development, embracing the mental condition that she had. So we'll talk a bit more about it. Aparna will talk a bit more about it when we come to it. And Vandana's book is Hinge. So it's about our life. What I took from it is that it's about our emotional and mental well-being being hinged. And then there are factors that unhinge them. So Vandana's book is based on research with people, stories of people who have lived through different contexts and conditions and how they have impacted upon their mental health. She, however, brings it back to what we can do for ourselves to hinge ourselves. So I believe that this is going to be a rich conversation, and many of us are going to resonate with parts of what they have to say. To kick it off, can I ask a question, the same question to both of you? What motivated you to write the books? Aparna, would you like to go first about your personal journey?
Thank you, Bulbul. So actually, writing is how I make sense of the world. Even in my day job, I guess, I've been a journalist and for some time now and a columnist. But when I was officially diagnosed, and that happened quite a while after I, started having these incidences of mania. But when I got officially diagnosed, I wrote a note for my friends and family and my immediate circle and my medical practitioners saying 10 things I learned about being bipolar. And so that was like a short note of a few pages. And then my book club, who was really supportive at the time, said that I think this could turn into a book. So that's where the idea for the book really emerged. And I have to say that there were a lot of roller coaster in between wanting to write the book and actually having it out in print, because I kept having mood swings. And so I just wasn't detached from the material enough. But I finally reached a stage where I actually got the detachment I needed, and I got that time, space, and distance to write it. This was written during COVID. So for me, actually, it gave me something to focus on and gave me a lot of purpose during COVID. But yeah, I started writing it because that's how I make sense of the world around me. And then I thought, it could help other people also. And that was really one of the ideas.
Yeah, Aparna, so one part of it was for yourself, writing for yourself. And the other part, because you printed a book, it's also to communicate to the larger audience. So what is it that you want to communicate? Could you just... couple of things like that?
I think I want to, I want to help people find a pathway into living with a mental health condition, because certainly when I was diagnosed and when I first had trouble in my 20s, the message I was really getting from the world around me was that this is a life sentence and you're not going to be able to have a fulfilling personal life or a fulfilling social life or perhaps a career. You're not going to be able to get all of that. And I think what I want to do is to say that, look, it doesn't have to be that way. And that there are ways to get there. And there was nobody to tell me all of that when I was in my 20s, to help me with that or to help my family, So this book is as much for individuals with mental health conditions as it is for all the people in their ecosystem, which is their caregivers, loved ones, friends, family, colleagues, well-wishers, anybody who's really supportive of them, all the allies. So I think it's just to help people find, this is one pathway that's worked for me, and hopefully there'll be something that will be, that people can develop. It's an invitation for people to find their own pathway.
Thank you. I think we all know that the bipolar disorder is a major psychiatric disorder which is characterized by mood swings. It swings between manic episodes and very depressive episodes. It can be quite debilitating, and possibly one of the, mental health is a taboo subject, right? There's a lot of stigma around it. And I think as a practitioner, as a clinical practitioner, what I think is the reason why there's so much of stigma around mental health is because it affects mental conditions. It affects the way we behave, the way we think, the way we respond, the way we relate to people. And it threatens to almost define us. I think that is why the stigma lingers. And for me, and that is a myth. We have, each of one of us, we have several characteristics, and our mental state is a characteristic. Yeah? And what I got from Aparna's book is that living with quite a major mental health condition, it was not her. She was Aparna, someone quite independent of the bipolar disorder. She embraced it. It was a part of her life as much as anything else. And, but she channeled it through, in psychoanalysis, we talk about something called sublimation. So she channeled her pain and suffering through creative pursuits. And actually that was a part of her journey towards self-actualization. And that is what is so amazing about her book for me. Does that resonate with you, Aparna?
It's lovely to hear that. I'm glad that came through for you. But yes, I definitely want to say that, having a mental health condition is not your only identity. Certainly, as I say in the book, I'm many things. Like we all have these identities of whether you're a parent or or a daughter or a friend or a spouse or all of these things. But I'm a hopeless cook. That's part of my identity, and I do a lot of other things. So I think this is just one of them. So it's not all of me for sure. Yeah.
So coming to Vandana. So Vandana, what was your driver to write The Hinge? And maybe you could introduce the book as well.
Well, I wrote Hinge because I was trying to search for factors that lead to emotional and mental distress, especially in people who seem congenitally well. So, the first section is called normal. So is it within the so-called definitions of normal? Are there triggers that can lead us to emotional and mental distress and disequilibrium? Then is it the emotions which are too powerful? Is it that we don't know the nature of emotions? Is it that we can't handle certain emotions? We don't know how to handle and recognize anger. We don't know how to handle and recognize stress. We don't know the trajectory of depression. We don't know what to do with it once it starts manifesting itself, or we see it manifesting in somebody else. So the second section, which is called Unhinge, which takes you through all those emotions and the trajectory of each emotion, is also for hopefully for someone who's experiencing it, and also for family members and friends and loved ones who want an insight into what's going on with this person. And then the final section, which is called Hinge. So there's normal, there's unhinge and hinge. Hinge is really about what are the resources available to me within, irrespective of circumstances outside. I mean, wellness is an interplay, or in fact, existence, life is an interplay between the external and the internal. And sometimes it's we feel victimized, we feel the circumstances are overwhelming. And those circumstances, of course, we have to keep trying that they change. But there are times when they can't change, not as quickly as we would wish them to. And therefore, what are the resources available within me that I may, therefore, contextualize and use and know about and put them into perspective so that I may hinge myself back to this, what I call a center shaft, or to being centered again.
Yeah, Vandana, would you like to talk about your perception of the milieu, the context, why this book was so necessary now, about the deluge that you talked about? Yeah.
Thank you so much, Bulbul, for reminding me of that. I do believe that we are living in a milieu which is actually prodding disquiet all the time. I think that this technology that is available to us, which is amazing, and I don't mean to run down anybody's effort or run down anybody from which all of us draw so much. But at the same time, I feel that it is actually the triggers of so much disquiet lie within this milieu that we are inhabiting. One is the technology. There's too much information coming at us all the time. Children don't have, there's too much choice. And if I may quote quickly the jam experiment, which was conducted by Sheena Iyengar, I mean, it gets quoted all the time. I'm not sure, I don't think I did in the book. But she and a colleague of hers put 6 jars of jam in a supermarket and then randomly asked people to pick what they liked. And after they made a choice, they interviewed them and said, how do you feel? And almost everybody said, oh, I'm so glad you did this. This is one of my favorite jams, or I'm very curious to try this, and I'm very happy about it. And then they increased 6 jams to 12 jams. And then they asked them the same question, and there was some, people were not so happy because they were wondering, should I have spent more time looking at something else? And when they increased it to 24 jams, everybody was so unhappy because they kept thinking that, I should have picked that, or I should have looked at that, or maybe I would prefer that, or maybe someone else would prefer that. So choice also has its use within a certain context and within, if I may, a certain boundary. And when we are putting young minds in an uncensored, violent, malicious world, which is the internet today in many ways, we are sitting on a mental health crisis if that's not already upon us. So, Hinge was, keeping that in mind, was hoping that would offer also ways for people to dig into their own resources, as I said, and therefore try to center themselves even more. And one thing is that you need, for mental health or emotional wellness, you need a certain sense of stillness. And I think that's what is missing in the milieu that we inhabit.
Yeah, I just wanted to tell the audience that we will have about 15 minutes towards the end for interactions with you. So if you have any questions or reflections, you can note them, keep them with you. We'll come to you. Yeah. I think what struck me about Vandana's book is there are stories, and many, many stories. And the stories are about normalized violence, normalized abuse, normalized triggers. So in our lives, in our families, in our work contexts, we have come to accept certain things. We don't question them necessarily, but sometimes they play havoc on our mental health. And then what do we do about it? So I was wondering, Vandana, would you like to talk a little bit about the triggers that you saw, how a very supposedly normal life can lead to a lot of mental distress and can constrain a person's self-actualization?
Well, Bulbul, you know, the very definition of normal, what is normal? Normal is very relative. It's really, it depends on various factors. And I think one of them is what was your early environment like? What was normal for you when you were growing up? What were the normal tone of discussion or expression at home? Was it a violent one? Was it a soft one? Was it an informed one? Was it an abrasive one? And I feel that a lot of propensities towards mental and emotional distress actually start from your early environment, because we are so impressionable as little children. And you know, your work would tell you, you would know that. So
I think one of the favorite topics for both Vandana and me is the difference between indulgence and nurturing. So maybe you'll come to that a little bit.
Yes, and so the first section actually tries to talk about what is the social normal, because the social normal may not necessarily be normal for someone who's trying to find an individual path and finds themselves caught within a very inflexible structure. And then it talks about the gender normal, and of course what is normal in psychiatry, what is normal in science. Just to throw a context, to put this in context, because you know I find a lot episodes of depression, episodes of and therefore also mania, as Aparna has experienced and has written about so lucidly. I think those triggers are just lying there. And if we know that these could be triggers to disquiet, I feel would be more informed, more conscious, more aware, for them not to affect us as much as they do when we're unaware of them.
So I think one of the stories in Vandana's book is about a woman, and this is what we see every day, even now in India, in the 22nd century. So it's about a woman who had aspirations like any other human being, but her circumstances were such after marriage that she was constrained. Yeah? She was not allowed to work. I mean, it was a very normal thing in that household. Women don't work. They take care of the household. But for her, and there are women who, to us, they survive it, living half their lives perhaps. And then there are women who do not survive it, and they succumb to a great deal of mental distress, which are extremely debilitating for them. We'll come to Aparna on how her context actually helped her through her pathway. But before that, Vandana, would you just like to talk about a couple of stories that you came across that were so striking about how the milieu affected people, and what you learned from there?
I learned a lot. I think it's difficult for me to pick any particular story because, like I said, most of them are so normal. I do want to say that some of the most heartbreaking stories when one was writing this book came from the chapter which talks about the sensual sexual normal, because that also throws light on alternate gender identities. LGBTQ and all the rest of it. So those were very, very traumatizing, even as one heard them, even as one researched them. And therefore one feels more and more how, the laws of a land, the unwritten laws of society, which therefore define what is normal, what is acceptable, have to be, if we want to be a healthy society, we want to have happy people within themselves, then, the entire spectrum is so important to look into. And while some of us and some people work on that, it is also equally important for us as individuals to delve into and try and understand our own triggers. This is how, for example, we all express anger. If I may just ask the audience, just for a moment, think of something that makes you angry all the time. It could, or makes you angry each time you think about it. And then if you could think of how is it that you express your anger? What is your expression of anger? And, is it that you shout? Is it that you pull away? Is it that you go for a walk? Is it that you try to keep it, hold it within for a while, and then there's one little prick and the whole thing comes, out like a volcano? What is it? And then if I may ask you, does that reflect the expression of anger of any one caregiver that you were with when you were growing up? It could be a grandparent, it could be parents, of course, it could be an uncle that you were close to. And so it becomes important. You will find that, yes, it does, more often than not. And so it becomes important to realize that this is not my expression of anger, therefore. And I'm just expressing it the way I've seen it being expressed. And therefore, then what is my expression of anger? And do I really want to express it this way? And that puts us in a space which is protective, I feel. Because immediately there's a sense of awareness, and there's that little space created between the emotion and the thinking and the thought of how I want to express it. And of course, we'll fail miserably each time. And I'll give you my own example. I made a film on anger because of that. I was never an angry person, never an angry child, never an angry adolescent. I had my teenage blues in my late 20s, but by the time I was in my 30s, I was chronically angry. And I thought to myself, this is not me. Something is wrong. And so I made the film on anger. But even now, there are times when I lose my temper, and immediately the space between, getting angry and realizing that I've become angry, and maybe this was really not what I wanted to say or how I wanted to say it, is less and less. Earlier, it was maybe 2 months or 2 years, for an incident. Then it became 2 weeks. Now it's less than 2 minutes. Sometimes it's just 2 seconds. And sometimes, therefore, I have a hold over how I want to say things. Because when I do lose my temper, I'm not affecting just people outside. I'm also affecting myself at the same time. So,
I think we all know that being adults are a huge responsibility, that many of us became adults before I became an adult because before I was prepared for it. But one of the responsibilities is also that inadvertently we are role modeling. We are role models to our children, to our nieces and nephews and our students. And so how does a woman in power behave would depend a lot on what role model she's following. Is she following a male, alpha male role model? So we often tend to think that just by replacing a man with a woman or one kind of a person with another kind of person, we bring about a big change. But I think it's much more subtle and nuanced than that, and it depends a lot on what we have actually internalized and how do we de-internalize that. With that, I'll come to Aparna because we are already talking about the interplay between self and the others, the milieu. Aparna, what I read in your book, in your journey, is that you have had a huge amount of support from people around you. And I have 2 questions about that. One, I think you have also admitted and acknowledged in your book that even for the caregivers around, for the family members and friends, it wasn't easy. I mean, it isn't just a matter of being more understanding or being more generous or being, or caring or loving. It's also about a lot of their own navigations and what enables them to do that. This is one question. And the second thing that struck me is I think I just mentioned, we often confuse support and nurturing with indulgence. Yeah. We often think that support means acquiescing to anything a person wants, yeah, even if that is uncomfortable to you. I think Aparna has cited a couple of stories about how her family, who loved her very much and wanted to help her, was also putting boundaries, was also helping her to check realities. And that was part of the support. It wasn't, am I making sense, Aparna? Would you like to talk about the support that you received? And yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So I think one of the sort of strong themes of Chemical Khichdi really is this idea that mental health is a team sport, and that it's not something that you can do on your own. I very much, like Vandana was saying, I talk about the role of the self. So it's really important to have self-awareness and, to have self-regulation, and all of that is very, very critical. And I think it's probably the most essential thing. But having said all of that, I do see mental health being a team sport, unlike, let's say, how we treat COVID, where somebody can just go into a room for a few days and recover on their own and come back out. So that support is really important. But of course, for whether it's family members, allies, loved ones, caregivers, whoever's there in the ecosystem, it's very challenging for them, because they have to deal with somebody who can be irrational, who's not behaving like themselves, who's acting very differently. They don't understand the behavior. They don't understand what's going on necessarily. For a long time, especially when it all started, we didn't have a diagnosis. We didn't really know what we were dealing with or how to manage this condition. And I've talked about all of that. And so my family, especially my mother initially and my sister, were really struggling. My husband, even though I told him that I had these problems, he didn't fully understand initially about what it all meant until we had a clearer diagnosis. So I think that, there's a lot of there's a lot of just sort of groping around in the dark about what actually is going on. Initially, I think a lot of people think of these things as being personality flaws, rather than life circumstances, rather than a medical condition. So I think the families have to deal with all of that. And I think ultimately what is it that enables them to get through all of that is really how much they care for the person. And also, frankly, if they're in a position to afford that kind of care, like if you're dealing with somebody, my family could take time off work to look after me if they needed to. They could come to different parts of the globe where if I really needed the help. It's difficult for anybody, to necessarily to have, if they've got limited resources, to be able to care for a family member in that way, if they're struggling with just daily, with daily life. So I think that's one aspect of it. The other thing, as for what you said, as for drawing boundaries, I think my family were pretty realistic that there was a point when they felt that for me, working in the family business was not actually good for my health, and I was getting stressed out about it, and it probably wasn't the right fit for me, even though that this was something that I had always imagined that I'd be doing. And then they just told me, I think my father at one point dictated a resignation letter, and at another point later on, my mother and my sister and my husband all said that, now you have to kind of resign from the family business. And so I think that what I've really seen, Bulbul, is that family members don't actually have the luxury of empathy. Okay, support is different from empathy. I think that the more empathy I've got is from a lot of the allies around me, who can listen to my stories and listen to them and kind of make me feel better about myself. But I think family members have a responsibility to actually, or caregivers rather, let's not call them family members, caregivers really have that immediate responsibility of getting a situation under control, of getting to peace and stability and to equilibrium. And then they have to just sort of embrace the hard truth and say it as it is. And I think that's what they've done for me, and that's been good for me.
We'll come to self, but since we are talking about family members and people around us, family and friends, I think, Aparna, this is a very important distinction between support and empathy. And I think probably the person who is undergoing the distress, the mental distress, as well as the caregivers, they need both. Yeah? Both may not come from the same sources. Say, for example, a family caring for someone who's going through a major depressive disorder, depressive breakdown. You know, sometimes the person cannot get out from bed, cannot feed themselves. Yeah? Sometimes they would just need support. You know, someone, they have to do a round-the-clock vigil. So they need support. They need physical presence of people that you cannot do remotely, that you cannot do just by talking. Yeah? And sometimes the family members also need empathy of what they're going through because they're judged. They judge themselves. They feel guilty. Sometimes they blame themselves for the condition. What did I do wrong? Parents invariably ask themselves, what did we do wrong? Yeah? And sometimes they don't know how to help. Yeah? And the other important thing that Aparna said is also about resources and privilege. I think privilege does not make any difference to the experience of mental distress. I mean, everyone goes through a huge amount of mental distress. The families, even with resourced families, they struggle and they're pained, and it's something that we cannot imagine unless we have been through that. At the same time, having resources does make a lot of difference to how much I can sustain support, to how much, whether I can get the best care for this person, whether I can get the best care for ourselves. Vandana, would you like to speak to that? Because you may have a slightly nuanced and different views on that. Is that?
Well, you know, I feel that we need to look at different states of emotional and mental wellness and different personality traits, as you say, Aparna, from a different lens. You know, I'm grateful we have access to medication and modern medicine. I mean, I have great respect for it, but by the definitions of you know, what is normal or what is okay through modern medicine, I think, you know, Ramakrishna Paramhans may have been manic depressive to a very high level, or Sri Aurobindo, or anybody. I mean, of course, I'm throwing up big names. I don't mean that everybody who has issues like that is probably becoming extremely enlightened. Even though, to that effect, the first book that I read on depression was Am I Losing My Mind or Getting Enlightened? So, you know, all I'm trying to say is that these are different ways that emotions, especially, and the emotional trajectory is playing out within ourselves. To some extent, I think the person, we ourselves, who's undergoing it, who's experiencing it, can understand it for themselves, as you have, Aparna, in your book. To some extent, I think family has to understand that also, not only from the point of view of the person who's suffering it, but also from the point of view of where is this emotion coming from and where has it been triggered, you know. So, for instance, depression, in my understanding, is when you have a particular flow in your life and something obstructs that. It's a narrative which is broken. And that obstruction could be anything. It could be a failed love affair. It could be a school you wanted to go to but you couldn't. It could be a failed job opportunity. It could be a failed interview. It could be anything. Really anything it could be. But you are within a certain flow of life, and there is this obstruction, and then the mind tends to get stuck at that point of obstruction. So even though time is taking you forward and the days are moving on, more and more the mind is stuck to the point which says, why did that happen to me? And why did that happen? And it reaches such a point that you're unprepared to face the day because you're really unprepared. Because the mind, and moment you think why, a Pandora's box opens because one wheel turns another wheel, this didn't happen because my dad didn't do that, or my mom didn't do this, or my uncle, or my teacher, or my boss, and so on and so forth. So to your point about you know, the support of family and all, I think it's important to bear in mind, to understand more and more how certain emotions work, the power of emotions really. I think that's where the issue lies to a large extent, that in this normalization, we're really dampening, you know, we think everything is going to be within that really narrow confine of what we think is normal. And I think that has to change a little, even if in small measure at a time.
Yeah, I think one of the things that Vandana and I also discussed is that I think Vandana started off with talking about our childhood and what kind of behavior or responses we had when we were children. And she talked about gadgets. So we often see that now when we are in our child rearing practices, gifts, presents, gadgets, technology, it plays a very big role. Yeah? And sometimes it makes me wonder as a clinical practitioner, so if a child is having a tantrum and wants something, is it my responsibility as a parent, as a caregiver, to give it to the child so that the child is no longer engaging in tantrums? So what is it? I think at every point we are making choices as individuals, as family members, as parents, and our choices do have an impact on our child, our children, what they're internalizing, what kind of role model we are presenting to them, what they're getting used to, what are they learning to take for granted, how they're developing their sense of entitlement. So each choice we make has an impact on that. I think there's no easy way to make choices, and none of us can be 100% right all the time or make choices that has the best impact. But probably this is something to be aware of, to be conscious of, because inadvertently we are building or not building mental well-being for ourselves and our family members. Coming to self, between interface and the family and coming to self, how do we actually help ourselves? Aparna, with your very supportive environment, family members who cared for you, loved you, tried to help you, at the end of the day, it was you, right? Who probably at some point made a choice that I need to pull myself out of it. And that is why you cooperated and collaborated with people around you to kind of lift your own mental health. So would you like to talk a little bit about how you helped yourself, and especially for people who have mood disorders, especially for people who feel that it's something so daunting that it cannot be managed? A little bit from you. Yeah.
Yeah, so the book really talks about 7 therapies that I evolved, and that sounds a little scary. Like 7 therapies sounds like a lot of things to be done by somebody when they're just struggling to keep their head above water. But really, it's 3 things that I think really helped me was the family support, the right lifestyle. That's really, really critical. I think we all talk about lifestyle nowadays, food and nutrition and sleep, but it's really a matter of, for me, day-to-day stability to actually just follow that. And then obviously the medical part. So that's like that's sort of the essential thing. Yeah. But the things that really took me from surviving to thriving to being at a stage where I can write a book about it. A big part was the stuff that I did on my own, which was the self-therapy and the spiritual therapy, especially, which were both combined. And the self-therapy was, a large part of it was the conversations I was having with myself through my writing, maintaining a journal, which I think, Vandana, you also do. And I think that it sounds like such a basic thing. We all hear about how important it is to journal, and it sounds like something, a teacher might tell you that you should maintain a journal or something like that. But it's really, really been so valuable for me to specifically, what I do is to write about what's happening with me, and then to think about how am I feeling about this, and why am I feeling about this in this particular way? And then what am I going to do about it? So that process of writing is that process of detachment, and ultimately when we're dealing with mood swings of any kind, whether it's depression or anxiety, stress, fear, or mood swings like mania, more extreme ones, we're dealing with emotions and thoughts that we may not always control, and that may not be, what we actually want to be. So what really is important for me is to kind of not to observe the emotion, not become it, right? That's what we're taught in yoga also. So I think that process of writing was the way for me to detach. Now, somebody may have something else altogether. It might be music, it might be sport, it might be art, it might be something else. But I think the act of writing and just for yourself, I've shared some of my journal in the book, not all of it, but just that act of writing for me was an act of detachment and of just understanding myself, my triggers, and to examine notions like, what is success for me? What is happiness for me? What is purpose for me? What is dharma? What is fulfillment? I mean, these are all philosophical questions that philosophers have, asked for centuries. And I think just asking them of yourself is really a good exercise.
I think a couple of very good insights, even from a clinical point of view. One is the role of structure, which cannot be underscored. And the other is, whenever we are undergoing mental distress, when a person comes to me for counseling, what I try to do is to help the person be an observer, an observer to herself or himself. And that is how you place things in perspective, you reframe your perspective. So I think that is what Aparna was doing through her journaling, where she was almost looking at herself and it was reflecting on herself and making some choices, making some, yes, please.
And to Aparna's point about having a routine, this is what I despair about most, is that with these mobile phones now, you have children looking at it, young people looking at it at 2:30 or 3 o'clock in the morning. I mean, your circadian routine is in distress, deep distress, if not completely out of whack. That's what I mean. I mean that, we need to come back to the basics. We really have to come back to the basics. Earlier, you talked about, a child throwing a tantrum. You take a gadget away from a child, and he or she behaves like like alcohol has been taken away from them, or a drug addict has been denied drugs. It's crazy. It's really crazy. And I think to add to Aparna's, one is journaling, and the other is, if you can encourage them to do any physical activity, whether it's with your hands, whether it's gardening, whether it's cooking, whether it's sport, take them to the park, take them to sports classes if you have to, coaching or whatever it is. I think that's one way ahead where it's going to keep them in more in balance than anything else. That's my belief.
So Vandana, before we go to the audience, would you like to say something about your idea of how you stay hinged? You already started it, but anything more you would want to say about how you stay hinged and centered and what's excess?
Personally is what you're saying? I mean,
from your book.
From my book, actually, I think I've covered most of the points. I really do emphasize the physical activity. I feel, there's some things in the last segment, very quickly, there are 5 or 6 chapters. One is logic. How may I use my logic to do things that can help hinge me? And the next one is body. What do I do with the body? And how much importance do I give to my physical well-being? Not just well-being, but what do I do with my body? Do I play sport? Do I do this? Do I do that? And I'm saying all this is because when you feel unhinged or you see someone unhinged, you really don't know where and how to tell them to center themselves. I mean, how to help them, not tell them, but how to help them center themselves, whether it's your own self or somebody else. And I think all the sheets matter. The physical sheet, the emotional sheet, and the thought sheet. How do I orient myself? As Aparna, as you said, an overarching philosophy. You ask yourself all these so-called profound questions, and you arrive at your own answers. However, humble they are doesn't matter as long as they are honest and they're true for yourself. I think that is a very useful exercise, and I think that's an exercise that even the family has to do, or your allies have to do along with you. And then, of course, there's the emotional. How do I use the warmth of my heart? Why is everything that I'm doing outside this competitive world that we have created for ourselves, which only values success and only values brilliance or whatever it is? Where do I place the warmth of my heart, which is so inherent to me? How do I make use of that in my wellness? Because I have to. If that remains unexpressed, we are nothing. So that's what also Hinge tries to touch upon and therefore give a context of that. And finally, center, which is when you bring it all together. To my mind, not just to my mind, actually, the very definition of health in Hindi or Sanskrit is swast, which is swa and ast, which is swa is my own and ast is being established or being centered. So how do I bring all this together with a sense of, no, not with a sense of stress, but with a sense of alert awareness, so that it is at some point effortless, but it's also not a further strain on me, so that I am centered and able to make use or express myself through all the different, the vast being that not only everybody is, but also this whole context that we are in, which is the external and the internal.
Thank you. I think both Vandana and Aparna, you've touched on something quite philosophical. And this is why I believe that mental health cannot remain in the clinics and remain within specialists, because it is about our worldview, really. You know, our mental well-being is about our approach to life. What do we prioritize in our lives? What do we want to pursue and at what cost? How important are interpersonal relations to us? How important are relationships to us? I mean, what gives us pleasure? What gives us pain? So it's about, actually, it's about our philosophy of life. And with the world fast changing around us, I think mental health questions are very much rooted in sociology. I mean, right now, the approach to mental health is through very rigorous science. Yeah, you fix a chemical disbalance, you do an exercise that changes your thought pattern, but then there's this whole part that it's actually rooted in who we are, how do we want to see ourselves, what do we want to do, what do we want to give up for what. Yes. We'll now open, it's for you, if you have questions, reflections, comments, yeah, please. You'll get the mic, and please.
Hi, my name is Shumit Lai Roy, and I'm asking this question in the avatar of being the founder member of the Red Curtain. We like doing good theatre for good causes. Has any Indian author written a play which positions mental illness not as a stigma? Because we'd love to produce it.
I cannot think of it at the moment, but we'll keep that in mind.
Would either of you like to write one? Vandana? Yes? Yes, please do. Fine.
Yash, well, you have a volunteer right away. If I can contribute, I'm happy to.
Every brilliant thing is a foreign one. Oh, broken image is fine. Yes, sir. Anyone here?
Hi, so I'm Sarthak, and I am a designer, and I'm 19. So you talked about detachment from gadgets, and that being an essential part of our life. So I, being a designer, has to be in touch with my laptop and my phone all the time, and I don't see people around me doing other activities or other physical activities. The max to max thing that we do is play football for a short amount of time. So what do you suggest, in a larger scale, what should be done so that we could be more connected to life more than connected to gadgets in a way?
Thanks, Sarthak. I completely understand your dilemma. I think we can't wish them away. We're part of that whole system. And we have to respect it. They give us a lot. They are huge, wonderful tools. I think we have to be more and more aware of, am I really working on my gadget, or am I checking my chat and my social media? And if it's important for me to check my chat and my social media all the time because my work is coming through it, you have to put certain defined times and say, I'm going to look at it for 5 minutes. And if there's no important message, I'm not going on Instagram and looking at animal, videos and dancing videos, which I've done myself and been caught with. And now I really look at my phone and say, okay, no important message, okay. And if I'm caught in video, I really say 2 minutes and then I'm off it. Because the power, you see, when we were young and we played video games or watched television, it was not as powerful as the tools that are available today. Today, they can suck you in completely and disorient you completely from what is real and what is virtual. And that is really something you have to do. The moment you begin to feel hollow, which means that you have overstepped it. And only you can step that, make those boundaries for yourself.
Yeah, I think the boundaries has to be set by the person who is using the device. So, for example, I can give you I make content for other people, so I review the content as well. So we need to look at content as well. But while looking at the content, we fall in this everlasting loop ki you are watching something and then the same device is for work and leisure. So that is the confusing part about how to segregate.
There's no confusion. The one thing apart from sport and keeping yourself physically fit is you have to sharpen your discretion. That is the word I feel in the age that we're going ahead. Discretion.
Thank you.
Thank
Can
you.
I just add one thing?
Yeah.
Is that I think also if you can do something with your hands, we've forgotten how to use our hands. Like I'm always trying to learn the piano. I never get very far, but I'm always trying to learn it. But cooking, gardening, creativity, art, playing with young people, like whatever it is, using our hands also is really, really important to kind of just align everything, head, heart, hand, differently from the devices.
I think just one reflection from me. Because we have technology, we have Aparna joining us today, right? So no disrespect for technology and gadgets. I think, is it a tool or does it control us? I think that is the key question. And in my experience, one of the characteristics of all of us, and the younger we go, the more so, is that we don't have patience. And the reason why we get hooked to gadgets is that it's fast. You do it fast. Rather than going out and playing football and learning it the hard way, we can play a video game on football and we keep winning goals, right? It's fast. So that is where it comes to our worldview, right? Questioning, reflecting a little bit on what we want. Yeah.
I think that needs another discussion another time, video games. So, but thank you very much.
Yes. Are we out of time? Yeah, okay. Thank you very much for listening to us, and thank you, Aparna and Vandana. It was great talking to you. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Aparna. Lovely to talk to you. Thank you, Bulbul. Thank you, everybody, for being here.